My name's Lucas. I'm the founder of Boost Your Biology, and my specialties are men's hormonal health, nootropics, and testosterone optimization. And welcome to the Fitness and Lifestyle Podcast.
Welcome to the Fitness and Lifestyle Podcast. I'm your host, Danny Kennedy, and I'm here to help you become the very best version of yourself. Perfect, brother. Lucas, welcome to the Fitness and Lifestyle Podcast, man. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
I'm stoked to have you here, man, because I feel like every guest that I have on, I've always got like a personal interest, obviously, in what they've got to say. And today I feel like there's going to be so many gold nuggets, I guess you could say, from this episode for not only myself, obviously, but for the audience to take away and start utilizing straight away. So, mate, what actually got you into the space you're in now? And actually before that, biohacking. Let's start with that.
Sure.
Biohacking. Can you give us an explanation as to what biohacking is?
Yeah, so biohacking is essentially just a way of manipulating your environment, utilizing supplementation, modulating your nutrition to basically improve any aspect of human performance. So biohacking, it sounds like a pretty crazy term, but it's just essentially all it is human optimization. So taking control of your physiology through different modalities, things like earthing, looking at the sun in the morning, exercise, and just different lifestyle hacks. So I think a lot of people, when they hear the term biohacking, they think of like inserting like chips into your
different gadgets and shit like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But it really isn't anything like too over the top. I mean, at least not what I, preach sort of thing. So yeah.
Awesome. And so coming back to my original question before I decided to just completely change paths, what got you into this space? Obviously you're a naturopath. What was your initial interest and what got you, I guess, intrigued in starting to understand all these and help people obviously as well?
Yeah, I mean, I was always really passionate about improving my performance playing soccer. So I used to play like semi-professionally. Always had a childhood dream of becoming a professional soccer player, playing overseas. And then I just looked into different supplements and things that I could utilize to improve any aspect of my performance on the soccer field, whether that be like improving my ability to read the play or improving recovery times. So I just started experimenting and trialing and logging my results and just being like a little lab rat myself and, experimenting and obsessed with research. Like I just honestly in my spare time, I'd wake up in the morning, first thing I do on the toilet is start looking up research articles. So I was always like really obsessed with like learning and understanding like mechanisms of action. Like people oftentimes like refer to me as like the mechanisms of action guy because I just love learning about like how does it work? I love learning about the intricacies and the details about that sort of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I really just fell in love with that whole space of like biohacking. And I also felt like I had something unique to offer. I always felt like if I'd learned something really new and novel or exciting, I was like, what's the point of keeping it to myself? I might as well just share it. And so that's when, started the Instagram, the podcast, and now I'm just creating lots of content.
Yeah. And so for the audience of the Fitness and Lifestyle Podcast is quite broad, but obviously most people have a pretty significant interest in their health and fitness and ultimately becoming the best version of themselves. You mentioned supplementation before, and I think for a lot of people, the word supplementation, instantly people kind of just pair that with obviously physiological results or outcomes, right? Whether you're thinking of a pre-workout, a protein, creatine, whatever it may be. But I want to dive into nootropics and I guess what they are for the audience that don't know. And I guess some of the key ones that you're kind of experimenting with at the moment or giving to clients that can actually have an impact on people's cognitive ability.
Yeah, well, the term nootropics basically just refers to a category of supplements that can improve cognition, whether that be improve focus, concentration, memory, reduce anxiety, things like that. And so over the years, I've dived deep into synthetic nootropics, so like actual drug-based, compounds, and then natural compounds, herbal extracts. Being a naturopath, obviously, we learnt about, Bacopa monnieri and the basics like ginkgo biloba. So I had a lot of experience learning.
Just the basics for all you guys out there listening. Yeah.
So I was very, I understood like a little bit about those, herbal supplements. And then, just started looking into compounds that could like improve dopamine signaling, because I quickly learned that dopamine was the neurotransmitter that would, increase my chances of being more disciplined and lead to greater success in my business. So I started just playing around with different compounds and researching different dosages, and I came across, a few gems along the way, and, now I'm like talking about them prolifically online and seen some pretty tremendous results with some of these, compounds.
I guess obviously the next question would be what were some of those compounds and some of the findings you took away from all these experiments, and whether it be the dopamine signaling or other, I guess, compounds that can help people with, things like clarity and productivity. Obviously, for those that are listening that are within the business space as well, productivity is constantly something that people are trying to, improve as often as possible. So what have been some of your findings that you are now talking about?
Yeah, so I was always interested in like vitamin derivatives. Like I'm very hyper obsessed with like, B vitamins and things like that. And so I looked into a derivative of vitamin B1, which is called Thiamax. And so vitamin B1, essentially what it does is it helps to utilize glucose as an energy fuel source for the brain. And so what this particular B vitamin does is it accelerates glucose oxidation in the brain and enables better utilization of the brain's favorite fuel source. And so with that particular Thiamax, I mean, some of the effects that I've noticed, and even with clients and things like that, is that they just no longer have that afternoon crash of energy, which a number of people complain about when their caffeine starts to wear off.
Yeah.
And so there's many potential, reasons how this is having that effect, but I think it's just definitely it's a big winner because there's minimal side effects. Like it's not likely for clients or people to experience side effects, and it basically is correcting energy metabolism at the very root cause. So we're actually increasing the body's primary energy fuel source, ATP, and just like we see with creatine, it's assisting with ATP production in the body.
You just mentioned creatine. I think, again, most people would pair creatine with physiological results, but there are some significant cognitive, I guess, enhancements that come from creatine there. So are you able to explain a little bit about that, please? Yeah,
so a number of people probably associate creatine with, bodybuilding or building muscle, but there's a lot of new research coming out on the benefits of creatine in terms of staving off cognitive decline or improving aspects of memory formation and executive functioning. So we're seeing that creatine in dosages as little as 2 grams per day in supplemental form, which is not much. Commonly prescribed doses are 5 grams per day as like a maintenance dose. Creatine is having a pretty outstanding effect in particular, it's like really improving cognitive domains in the elderly population.
Yes.
So over the age of 50, I wouldn't say it's old, but in that age range is where creatine can really shine.
And is it a specific type? Like obviously, is it creatine monohydrate? Is it like what are the specifics?
Well, creatine monohydrate is considered the gold standard creatine. However, there is a new form of creatine which I've spoken about quite a lot. It's called cregatine. And this is
confused creatine.
It's basically it outperforms creatine monohydrate, and there's a ton of different forms of creatine on the market. There's all those creatine HCLs, but this one here in particular has a much better ability at crossing that blood-brain barrier and actually improving cognition. The first week that I tried that particular cregatine, I noticed like really vivid dreams, and my memory recall was definitely improved using that form.
Obviously, for someone like yourself who's testing out these different compounds and different nootropics and like that and whatnot, there's for most people I'm assuming they're not supplements or compounds that they can just readily go down to the supplement shop and get themselves. So are there any that you would recommend that are readily available to most people? And I guess what are the actual effects or benefits of using these different nootropics?
So in some cases, if we're looking at like, let's say I was like driving in a desert and I come across like a pharmacy that's like, and I had access to only one product over the counter, I'd probably lean towards vitamin B12 as like an over the counter quick, what can I take for energy, focus, mood? Purely because even those who are not deficient in vitamin B12, let's say you're eating plenty of meat, chicken, whatnot, and you actually have sufficient amounts of B12 in your body and you're not deficient, even supplementing B12 exogenously can actually give you a pretty significant boost in like mental clarity, focus, energy, and things like that. So over the counter things, I mean, it depends where, if, we're talking Australian counters or US or Thailand.
Yeah. Goes up a level there.
Yeah.
Interesting. So B12, I mean, coming back to, we touched on before, the productivity side and the mental clarity. For someone that's sitting down about to crunch out a heap of work, whether people are studying or someone's working on a new product or project, whatever they're working on, obviously there's other things or aspects that come into play, whether it's things like hydration and your environment and nutrition, obviously, and all that type of stuff as well. For someone who is really looking to just zero in and have that full concentration and productivity, what is the ultimate stack in terms of, with nutrition, hydration, but then also the supplementation side as well?
Yeah, I'm glad you prefaced that by stating, the importance of all the other aspects of, nutrition, getting good sleep, exercise. Like most people, I'd hope, understand that they're like the 80-20 and that nootropics it's just adding an extra 1 or 2%. And hopefully, they're deploying all the other strategies first and then, doing some of the nootropic stacks. But if I were to formulate like one stack in particular that I've put together, is a combination of an amino acid L-phenylalanine, which is found in, and people hear that and be like, oh, is that dangerous? Like, is that bad for you? No, it's an essential amino acid that the body needs. We're consuming every single day from chicken, fish, nuts, things like that. But if you take it in supplemental form at a dosage of around 1,000 milligrams, and for me personally, I like to actually just dump it under the tongue as like a sublingual form.
Yeah.
If you combine that with then a little bit of also taurine and then something called uridine monophosphate, that stack there is something that will just make you want to get shit done, like be hyper-focused, hyper-productive. And it's because it's working purely on that dopamine system, providing the substrates to actually create dopamine. And if you're someone who drinks coffee, that stack there would synergize really nicely with caffeine as well.
With caffeine?
Yeah.
Where would people find these?
Well, some of these, like these ones that I've mentioned here, they're readily available from nootropic vendors in the US. They're the ones that I sort of trust. Nootropics Depot is one of them.
Chuck a link to that in the show notes. I've used that one before.
Yeah, they're great. And then also some companies that I personally like are Thorne, that's one, and then Life Extension. But it depends on the actual the supplement itself. But that stack there that I mentioned, that's like the get shit done stack.
Yeah.
There is a famous stack actually out there known as the Mr. Happy stack.
Would love to hear that one, obviously. Yeah.
That one there is a combination of omega-3s, like really high dose omega-3s, which I know probably a lot of your audience probably takes every day. Plus uridine that I mentioned before, uridine monophosphate, and then B vitamins, and then CDP choline, which is a choline source. That stack there is like the OG, like it's like the original nootropic stack to help with increasing neuroplasticity and actually putting you in a pretty good mood state. And that's actually...
So is that increasing like dopamine levels as part of that, or how is that actually working?
So that stack there is actually working on upregulating the dopamine receptors. So over time, as we cook our brains using social media and things like that, pornography, illicit drugs, like they can downregulate dopamine production. But this stack here in particular can actually reconfigure and upregulate those dopamine D2 receptors, and that by itself can have a pretty profound effect on mood state. And I actually remember the very first time I tried that was actually first year uni, and I remember taking it before like going to university, and I remember just feeling like everything seemed a bit more vivid. I was a bit more cheerful and just chirpy. Everything seemed a bit more brighter, and I just felt like I was like not phased by like just negativity. And
wow,
yeah, it really is noticeable for someone who's a naive user.
Yeah, for sure. Just on the topic of dopamine, outside of supplementation, what are some tips you can give around how to, I guess, you see people talking now about doing, what do they call it? Where you're kind of...
Dopamine fasting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of someone who feels like their dopamine receptors have been overdone, right? Whether it's all the things you mentioned before or whatever it may be, and they're trying to get it back to the point where they're able to have small dopamine hits from things that aren't from external sources, I guess you could say. What's the best way to go about that?
Yeah, so what you're referring to here is like, what are the ways in which we can utilize other things in our environment to upregulate dopamine production naturally, or those receptors. One of them is actually something that I think a lot of people are fearful of is sun exposure, like being outside, in the sun. That's been shown to upregulate dopamine receptors, and that probably contributes to the good mood that you feel when you travel up to Queensland. Or
I was going to say, I haven't seen it here for a while, so
yeah. So I mean, that's like one strategy. Also, endurance. I mean, without endurance exercise or HIIT training is another way to upregulate dopamine receptors, and just making sure you're not deficient in basic vitamins like vitamin D, vitamin C. Like these things can actually. The most obvious one, which is probably the most prolific right now, is there's over 1 billion people worldwide who are low in iron, who are deficient in iron. They're anemic or sub-anemic sort of thing, and like that can significantly affect your dopamine production.
Is that because they're not getting good sources of iron in their diet and stuff like that, or is it something that people should be looking to supplement with regardless of how much they're getting from food?
Yeah, so ultimately it's going to come back to like doing routine blood work and blood testing, which is something that I often encourage all clients to look at their blood work. But it can definitely be a lack of iron intake from actual diet, not able to absorb iron, so low stomach acid or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO, things like that. There are many factors that can affect like someone's iron status. Like I know guys that have smashed, like they eat steak every single night, like 5 nights a week, but their levels were still low. And that could be because it's an absorption issue. They might have been using reflux medications, which can also affect iron levels as well. Right. So yeah, and also coffee. A lot of people don't really know this, but coffee can actually block the absorption of iron when we have it around like iron-rich foods.
Right. Is that because it's acidic or something, or?
Yeah, because of the polyphenols and some of the tannins in coffee can actually block iron absorption. Right. When we have it alongside like a steak or something like that.
Interesting. So one last little thing here on, I guess, the supplementation side of things before we move on to testosterone, which is something I really want to dive into. But for those that are listening, outside of, again, like the supplements that you would typically buy for the physiological results, I guess, your typical stuff like protein, all the other stuff that we've talked about already, what are what are the supplements that you would highly recommend having in your house and using daily, and I guess when So again, like maybe not to the detail or to the level as someone like yourself would, where you are using all these nootropics or whatever it may be, but just some of the everyday supplements, whether it be things like vitamins and stuff like magnesium and whatever it may be, some of the things that are on the list of highly recommended.
Yeah, so let's say we start with like the highest impact factor, like the highest impact, lowest hanging fruit. First up would be vitamin D. If someone's undergoing, or they're, in the winter periods, they're not able to get vitamin D from food, you just simply cannot get vitamin D from food. So like keeping vitamin D in the pantry, $30 or whatnot, keeping that there in cases of winter months and keeping vitamin D levels at the top end of the reference range will actually help to prevent getting super sick when the flu goes around. Things like that can actually have a pretty significant effect.
What's the recommended dose of vitamin D? Because you see, I guess, varying opinions or varying ranges.
Yeah, you have the band who are like the camp who say mega dose that and just do massive amounts every single day. I think the maximum upper limit per day should be about 7,000 IU.
Yeah.
I think any more than that, you need to really start balancing all the other cofactors like vitamin K2, which actually helps alongside vitamin D to help with calcium deposition into bones and things like that. But I'd say, vitamin D is just a good one to have, during those periods. And then I'd actually recommend having some sort of like liver support.
Right.
Surprisingly, a lot of people will be like, why is he talking about liver? Who cares about the liver? But actually, it's probably one of my staples in my cabinet. And one of the things that I take every single day is artichoke extract.
Right.
It's pretty.
So you're talking liver support.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're not talking like Liver King, eating liver or anything like that.
Well, in particular, just helping the liver to detoxify, do its job. Like anything. So like that's the reason for artichoke extract. Taurine's another one, another amino acid that can just be really versatile, help with anxiety, general like feelings of stress, working really well with magnesium. So there's like some pretty like basic ones you can keep in the pantry. And then also having another really great immune boosting herb is black seed oil.
Right.
That one there.
Mood boosting.
Immune.
Immune. Sorry. Yes. I can need one for hearing.
Yeah. So some sort of immune boosters. Yeah. Black seed oil is really good. 1 teaspoon of that can help with like general colds and flus and things like that.
I've been hearing a lot lately about ashwagandha or ashwagandha, however you pronounce it. What are the main benefits of that, and is it what it's been hyped up to be?
Yeah, so ashwagandha has become I call it the devil's herb now because it's notorious for a side effect at the moment that's like affecting thousands of men around the world without them really knowing, and that's its effect on blunting the pleasure response, which we're talking about the dopamine desensitization effect.
Yeah,
it can pretty much mimic that state where you're feeling blah, sort of feeling a bit numb,
almost like an antidepressant type. Effect.
Yeah, like capping the highs and
right,
but not.
So you're just pretty much just neutral,
flatlined.
Wow,
like a numbing of the emotions.
And is that at a significantly high amount, or is that just in general a prolonged use of ashwagandha?
Well, we're seeing individuals get that effect even after 1 week of dosing. So like after just 1 week of dosing, they're starting to experience side effects. And I think I've got theories, and this is actually $1 million question right now. So if anyone's listening to this who knows how to reverse these side effects, I'm on the hunt for it.
So these effects are hanging around even after people stop supplementing with it.
That's the devastating part is that I get messages. I'm active on social media, and I get at least 1 to 2 messages a day saying, "Hey man, I stopped ashwagandha last year and I'm still suffering from the side effects you're talking about. What can I do?"
And no one knows.
And we've got theories, I've got like what I call like experimental compounds that can help to relieve the side effects, but they're only temporary. And for some unfortunately, for some people, it can linger. Yeah, I mean, there's theories as to like why it's doing that, and there's one main theory that I've sort of like pioneered, and that's like desensitizing a particular serotonin receptor, the like 5-HT1A receptor, which is what you said. Antidepressants can actually do the same thing as well.
Shit, that's interesting. So even in small doses, right? So you're starting to see, obviously, I'm assuming very small amounts in a number of supplements now. Would you be avoiding them altogether?
Well, in some individuals who are really super highly stressed and anxious, ashwagandha can be a lifesaver for them, and that can be, highly advantageous and actually make them feel better and all sorts of stuff. But there's so many other ways to achieve an anti-stress effect without the side effects. Like there's like L-theanine. There's so many other ways to do it. I just think ashwagandha, it's just too risky in my opinion.
You mentioned the blood work before, and this is something I'm curious about. For anyone who's listening in Melbourne, right? Or actually anywhere in Australia, to be honest, but particularly Melbourne, this is basically for me. Where is the best place to go and get blood work done, and what should you be asking for to get like a fully comprehensive blood work done?
Yeah, so the company that I work with is called iMedical, imedical.com.au. Super easy. It's literally a private way to get a blood test, whatever you want. You can select whichever ones you want without a doctor involved. And you can literally select what you want. They'll send you your like form as an email.
Yep.
You can print off the form and literally walk into your local clinical labs or Dorovich and just say, here's my form, draw my blood. They draw your blood, and within 2 to 3 days, you can get your results emailed back to you without any doctor involved. And the reason why I've got nothing against doctors, like I'm a big believer in, I think they can be highly beneficial in certain situations, but it just means that you don't have to like beg to get blood work done.
Yeah.
Because they can be, I hear stories all the time. My doctor wouldn't let me get this. He was a headache. He just kept questioning me. Like, have you sort of heard that as well with like certain doctors, things like that?
Yeah, for sure. And not even that, like just getting blood work, asking for certain blood work, getting it back, and then only having like one or two of the things that I was hoping to actually look at as part of that blood work. So just having to go back multiple times. Oh,
it's just a nuisance. Yeah. It's a headache. I know it's out of pocket. Like you have to pay because it's not covered by Medibank or Medicare. But yeah, in this case, I'd say like iMedical. Another company is iScreen.
Okay,
that's another company. But yeah, they're like the main ones that I refer. And I've got like my men's hormonal panel. Actually on that site, they've actually created a panel that I recommend. I think it's called like Ergo ERGOH.
Okay.
We could link,
and that's most of the things that you would be getting people to get their blood work done on.
It's like all the essential tests that I think are really critical. Like it's awesome. There's probably like 18.
Unreal.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll definitely have links to that in the show notes below because I've been super keen to get some more bloods done. We had it was Dan Garner on the pod a while back, and we talked a lot about blood work and different levels that people should be keeping an eye on. And afterwards, I was just like, I have no idea where you would even get that done here without because there's some where you literally had to like send it away, and I think for a lot of people it's just too invasive and just not something that people want to be doing.
Yeah.
To be honest, but interesting. Let's dive into testosterone. So we obviously there's so many different hormones we could talk about, but today I think testosterone would be something that a lot of people, obviously predominantly men, are going to get a lot out of. The first thing I wanted to ask you is, what are the most common reasons as to why men have low testosterone outside of age?
Yeah, so I'd say probably the number one factor would have to be obesity. That's like it being overweight can actually lower testosterone through increasing inflammation, increasing the conversion of testosterone to estrogen. So I'd say like that would be probably based on the statistics, like that would be number one factor. Number two would be exposure to like endocrine disrupting chemicals we see in our environment, which we're all exposed to every single day. And that's one of the reasons why I was talking about the liver before, is because no matter where you live in Melbourne or Australia, like you're still going to be exposed to chemicals. And instead of being like hyper paranoid about trying to avoid, we just can't like fully avoid it. So like the next best thing is to like, okay, well, I'm exposed to it, then what can I do? I mean, I can jump in the sauna, sweat it out, things like that, take a liver sup. But I'd say like definitely exposure to plastics, drinking from plastic bottles, touching receipts, leaches plastic.
Say it again. Touching receipts. As in like a receipt that you would get from the supermarket or wherever?
I prefer not to touch the receipt.
Right.
Because the ink that's freshly printed on the paper is actually really high in BPA.
Shit.
Yeah. So just things like that, just to be to avoid. And then also like probably the fact that the testes get too warm. Like this is, a factor that a number of guys don't really consider, but there's a reason why the testes hang outside the body is because they need to be kept cool. Like they need to be kept cooler than the body itself. And so anytime the testes are too warm, that can actually decrease testosterone production. So that's like a factor that men should, consider. And then I'd say, like poor sleep, poor sleep contributes to a lot of health issues, but poor sleep's going to affect recovery and anabolic hormones and things like that. So yeah, definitely those.
In terms of the nutrition side of that, so obviously you mentioned before, if you're significantly overweight, that can have a negative effect. In terms of the nutrition side, what I guess are some tips or advice around things we can be doing with our food in order to keep natural testosterone on the higher side?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I think one thing that I see again with a number of athletes is like under eating or like caloric deficit.
Yeah.
I mean, you could speak upon that from your preps.
100%, man. Like you see it a lot, particularly obviously in that bodybuilding or physique space where the sole goal is to get as lean as possible, but people just significantly under eating and crash dieting and being in too much of a calorie deficit, or even pairing that with just an extended period of time in a severe calorie deficit, which obviously, potentially is going to help them get to their body composition goal. But the longer you're in that period, particularly in such a large deficit, it's detrimental to your testosterone for sure.
Yeah, and also affecting like neurotransmitters and so many other factors that would have a downstream effect on testosterone. So I'd say from like the nutrition department, making sure they're getting sufficient healthy fats. And like when I say healthy fats, I mean food groups like avocados, macadamia nuts, olive oil, coconut oil, ghee, butter. Like these are like the go-tos. Salmon, like fish. Like these are like the best fat sources. And then looking at the carbohydrate sources, I mean, it depends on whichever ones you can digest the best. I mean, personally, I'm a big fan of like white rice, good quality organic sourdough bread, things that I can easily digest, fruits, like raw milk where possible.
Where are you getting that? How you getting that?
Undisclosed.
Yeah. That was over the counter in Thailand, was it?
Yeah.
So, okay, that kind of ticks off that nutrition side. Another part of it that I wanted to ask you about is what actually is the ideal range of testosterone for males? And I guess you can obviously talk about this much better than I can, but like the free testosterone and whatever the other side of it's called.
Yeah, so reference ranges, basically the way that they calculate reference range is they take a large sample of the population, which of course
it's most likely low testosterone. Yeah.
So then they do the average and they draw that sample and then they adjust the reference range. So right now it's like 180 to 900.
And that's free is it what? How does that actually work in terms of those numbers? Because you kind of see, you know, even when I've had testosterone, blood test done for testosterone here, I'll get the range that's between.
The different number, like
the lower number, yeah.
Oh, like okay, so so that's picomoles per PMOL. So there's just a conversion,
right? Okay.
Conversion. So like, let's say you're around 30, which is very high in that number.
In that number, yeah.
That's like around 950.
Okay.
So when I was trying to max out my testosterone as high as possible, I was able to get it to 33.4. Which was about just under 1,000 nanograms per deciliter. And I had like a whole concoction of natural things that I could do to do that, to achieve that.
Feel free to just send me through what they were after this, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'll send you the stack and the protocol. So like in that particular situation, I was trying to like basically, what can I do to max it out as high as possible naturally? But going back to the reference range, like right now in Australia, like if you are a guy 25 years of age, your result is like 200. Let's say it's 200, which by the way, that's about the level of an 80-year-old man. You're considered normal. Like you are considered, there's nothing wrong with you. Just keep on going about your daily life. How is that the process in terms of like the way they get the ideal ranges by genuinely just basing it off the averages and continuing to, I guess, align it with whatever the population is doing when clearly that's declining over time? Well, they're actually reducing the top end of the reference range down. So like and everything's shifting down. So it's really not a fair way to.
It's going to get to a point where the high end range is 10 years ago, the bottom end of the low range.
Yeah. Or it could be like there's a theory that they say that in like 25 years from now, all men in the Western world will be infertile. That's like what they predict. And that's why like IVF and all that's going through the roof, and many factors are contributing to that. Sperm counts are plummeting down. Like men are just simply being under attack through so many different, environmental things. Like it's just difficult for a man, particularly the young men of today who unfortunately like they're suffering from like low mood. They're just not motivated. They're not as strong and resilient. They're not they're not confident. That's one really big area is that like we've seen through a number of the guys that I've worked with is like lack of confidence. And it really comes back to, I've never seen a guy with high testosterone lack confidence. Like I see them and they're all CEOs, executives, or they're just like smashing it. They've got their own business and they're just killing it. And they're the guys with the high test, and the guys with low test are the ones that are like just barely scraping by, and they're like, struggling in their relationship. They're struggling to.
Is that, I'm assuming, one of the larger reasons as to why fertility is dropping is because testosterone is dropping?
Yeah, definitely. Like there's a contributing factor there. So I think the reference range is like, realistically, let's say we're talking about, I'm sure you got tons of guys listening to this who are between the age of 25 and 40, let's say, but that's the demographic. Yep. If they're in that age range, I would want them to be in the upper end of the reference range, 700 to 900 total testosterone. And then that free testosterone anywhere from 450 to about 600 is like ideal.
Right.
And then, that's pretty much, if they're wanting to optimize their like energy, motivation, recovery, dropping body fat, building muscle
mass,
it's going to help with that.
Yeah. All right. So we've just kind of discussed particularly around the fact that on average in men testosterone levels are declining. Naturally, what can men be doing to increase testosterone? I think more so from a supplementation or compound side of things. Obviously, assuming that taking care of the nutrition, they're taking care of their sleep and trying to get high quality sleep. They're hydrated. They're training regularly and all that type of stuff. When it comes to the supplementation side of things, naturally first, because I do want to touch on some TRT stuff and help people get an understanding what that is and maybe who should look at taking that option. But naturally, what can people do?
Yeah, so obviously from a supplementation perspective, there's a ton of supplements out there that claim to assist with testosterone production or fertility and things like that. So I've personally sampled, hundreds of different supplements. I was telling you before, I worked at my dad's pharmacy, so I was already starting back early when I was 21, 22. So I was researching back then. Nowadays I've come up with like a particular stack, and the entire protocol I've laid out in like a beautifully presented like course. That's the Limitless course. Which we'll
have that in the show notes.
Limitlesscourse.com, shameless plug, but that's like
that's all right.
It's got a full suite of what I did to max out testosterone. So I'll start from top to bottom, like a high level. Tonkat Ali is definitely one of them, as you mentioned before, but again, it has to be a high quality extract, because I was saying to you that they can even fake Tonkat Ali with like sawdust, and
I reckon that's what was in the one that I was taking recently, going off the size of these.
Then another herbal extract, Fedosia agrestis, is definitely a winner. That's one that Dr. Andrew Huberman spoke about. And actually, just side note there, one of my favorite quotes that Andrew Huberman talks about is how he says that testosterone makes effort feel good. Think about that. Like, testosterone makes effort feel good.
Which then leads to more dopamine hits and stuff as well. Yeah.
It just makes, it's a positive loop.
Yeah.
So going back to that though, Tonkat Ali, Fedosia agrestis, and the third one is a Chinese medicine. So traditional Chinese medicine, TCM herb called Cistanche. And Cistanche is what they believe to be Genghis Khan's favorite herb that he used to populate what percentage of Asia with his masculine prowess abilities and mating behavior. But Cistanche is definitely one of them.
He was on the higher end.
Said to believe to they say that Cistanche can increase resting hang size, if you know what I mean, in terms of
yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely a winner. And then also,
what was that one again? Sorry,
Cistanche. You can remember it by Cistanche in your pants.
Yeah. Nice. So they're the three.
They're three, but then there's also taurine in a very, very high dose, so like about 5 grams of taurine a day. And then also pine pollen tincture. So like a really potent extract of pine pollen, which is like Mother Nature's most potent source of phytoandrogens. And that's like the concoction that I pretty much use to, max out my test.
Unreal. So we'll have a link to all that stuff in the show notes for everyone to go and check out for themselves, and obviously links to all of Lucas's stuff online as well. Before we kind of get towards the end here, I do want to ask you about TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, which is something that's becoming increasingly more popular recently. Not only being used, but just being talked about. You feel like I'm hearing people talk about it daily, and you're seeing it more online and whatnot. So firstly, what is it? I guess secondly, who should be looking to start to use TRT? And then I guess what are some of the actual, the cons of using it that some people probably aren't putting into consideration into?
Yeah, so first of all, TRT can only legally be administered if you are very, very low in testosterone. So like TRT stands for testosterone replacement therapy. And so most of the time TRT is administered in gel. So androgel is what's commonly used. But that's not the most effective way to achieve higher testosterone through exogenous use. The best way is injection. So that's like, depending on the individual, subcutaneous or intramuscular. And so some of the considerations, so like if we look at a scenario, the only time that I will like refer a client will be if they are concerned about fertility, they want to maintain their sperm count, then TRT is not a viable option, because TRT will actually significantly lower sperm count, and it can actually act as a male contraceptive when we introduce testosterone as a hormone into the body, because it basically it's telling the body it no longer needs to produce its own.
There's no counter.
There's no negative feedback loop.
But is there a counter
way to
compound way or whatever it is that you can be using at the same time?
Yeah.
To alleviate that problem.
Yeah. So a lot of men will then run something known as HCG, human chorionic gonadotrophin, which is a way to at least preserve fertility.
Right.
And that can definitely work. So this is where, men can't just be blindly just jumping on TRT for a couple of weeks and so they need to be really, and they also need to be really careful with the dosages as well, because there can be side effects with TRT,
right? Only
when administered under like conditions where they're not well dosed. They don't understand how to use it properly, and it can also, at very, very high doses, can also like thicken the blood in some cases. So this is where donating.
So when someone's pushing it way above natural levels.
Yeah. When they're pushing it into supra physiological levels, it can lead to thickened blood, things like that. And then also it can in some cases affect some markers of cholesterol when, again, really high, but you're better off. Honestly, I would rather a guy be on TRT in their 60s, 70s, and let's say 50s, 60s, 70s, than be suffering from low test.
Yeah.
It's like a clear, obvious benefit.
Yeah.
And like, I'm just shocked that my dad's not even on it, but
yeah,
it's
right.
his choice.
For someone that's pushing, so obviously you can, when using TRT, when done it correctly or with someone watching over you, you're most likely pushing your testosterone to the upper range or the higher range of what your natural test would be. For those that are, I don't want to ask this. So, because I know a lot of people who have been natural, let's say someone who's in the gym, right? A bodybuilder who is natural, has been natural their whole life. I feel like there's a bit of an argument or a case at the moment between someone getting on TRT and pushing their test to the upper limit of what natural test should be in comparison to someone who is just blatantly, jumping on the gear and anabolic steroids and whatnot. There's got to be clearly some physiological or a lot of physiological benefits for someone on TRT, probably not as much as someone on the anabolics, but would you still classify this person as natural if they're using TRT?
Technically, like they're not, if they jump on TRT, you mean under the age of like 40 or so?
Yeah. And I mean, starting to hear about
young guys.
Yeah, people in their 20s, even early 30s, someone that doesn't necessarily need TRT but is using it.
Well, in that case, I mean, they're not considered natty, but again, I have nothing wrong with that group of guys. If they want to, do that, then I don't think there's anything really wrong. If they want to like seriously improve their physique, recover like a beast and train like a beast, like it's going to help without a doubt. And so I'd rather see them do it well than be suffering from low test. Like it just think about the output that they can achieve. Like I hear it from guys all the time, and it's also the psychological benefit they get. A lot of guys say that they almost become addicted to that positive mood state. It is a drug. It is psychoactive. It can be very powerful in the brain. Makes them want to do more work. They feel more like they can do shit after work instead of just crash on the couch. Like they can just do a lot. That's what I hear, is their stress tolerance goes up significantly.
Interesting. In a bodybuilding show, would they be able to say, let's say a drug tested bodybuilding show, if someone had just used TRT to the upper limit of what they should naturally be at, would they fail their drug test?
Yeah, because there's a way of like detecting exogenous use. There's like a metabolite, epitestosterone. Right. They can figure that out.
Yeah.
There are ways to get around that though. There would be ways to
for sure.
Get around that sort of thing.
Interesting. So just to reiterate, you would recommend TRT for someone who is not worried about their fertility and they're pushing 40 plus and with naturally low test,
and they've exhausted all of the other modalities, like the natural stuff that I refer to, that if they've completely tried everything under the sun and they've just exhausted everything, then I'm like, right, you're a great candidate. You've had kids. You're not worried about having any kids anymore. Like you don't care about that sort of stuff. Then go ahead, you know.
Interesting. Mate, there is a million other things I feel like we could talk about, and you know, love to get you back on at some point. We can dive into all those other things, but I appreciate you coming on today. There's been so much that I've learned from today's episode, and I'm sure for all the listeners and those that are watching this at the moment, there's plenty of people taking a lot away from this. Is there anything else you wanted to mention before we wrap up, mate?
No, just really just like I'd say, like one last message is just to build that level of self-awareness when it comes to health. Like try and develop that, because there's so many different interventions you can trial, and build that self-awareness and try and just monitor how you feel, because like what I'm recommending may not be good for you, but ultimately it comes back to how do you feel, like how do you subjectively feel. If it's working for you, great, and there's no side effects, keep going. Otherwise, just hopefully they, you know, can devour my content and learn from my education. So appreciate having the opportunity to chat, Danny.
Pleasure, mate. Thanks so much for coming on, man. And for everyone who has tuned in, whether you're listening to this on whatever podcast platform you use or you are watching this, we'd love for you to send through some feedback. So maybe grab a screenshot of this episode, share it on your social media, make sure you subscribe to the podcast, share the episode with a friend, and we look forward to chatting with you guys in the next episode. Thanks so much for listening.
Awesome.